Craft Consulting to discuss the importance of having a customer-focused strategy for your business and its impact on long-term growth. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Angelo.
Yeah, this will be fun. I'm excited.
Me too.
Yeah, this is obviously a topic near and dear to me. Know your customer is one of my blog topics and something I talk about all the time. And unfortunately disappointed a lot of times when I really dig into it with folks in conversations. So maybe we can solve some of those world's problems today when it comes to customer centricity.
Just a few?
Just a few.
All right.
If we can get one. Let's just shoot for one. We'll solve one
good.
today. So before we get started, why don't you tell the audience about yourself and your business?
Well, Loyalty Craft was founded on the passion for helping companies create meaningful customer experiences. You know, we touch a lot of products and services every day, and unfortunately, like you said, come across companies that just don't deliver on that promise. And so helping companies better understand their customer and walk in that customer's shoes, really listen and understand the voice of the customer, measure it, because if you don't measure it, then it's hard to improve, and really create a strategy, craft a strategy around how do we be customer centric. And that comes down to, you know, at the very fundamental heart of it, the people that are delivering that. And so so much of that work comes down to your culture and the engagement you have with your employees, not just your customer.
Okay. When you talk to a client and we talk about a customer-first strategy, I'm going to use that term.
Sure.
Where does it start? Is it at the top, or is it the marketing guy, or is it the HR people? Who drives this? And then not only drives it, but who owns it?
Right. Well, it does need to be owned from the top. And I'm a huge believer that your leadership team needs to be on board and understand that this is a strategy and a mindset shift. It's really the philosophy of saying we put our customers first above all else. Now, that doesn't mean it's at the sacrifice of the employees or the shareholders. They all have to work in unison to deliver something special. And if you look at the great companies out there, the Starbucks and the Amazons and the Zappos of the world, you see that. Southwest is a great example too, where the employees are part of that. It can evolve from, you know, starting from marketing, and oftentimes that happens, is that a marketing a CMO may reach out and say, hey, we need help with our customer experience, or an operations person. But it does need to go kind of across the silos in order to work, which means it does need to be led from the top.
Okay. So we're going to talk about silos in a little bit later in the show, but there's two questions I always like to get in. And the first is, you have a business. What keeps you up at night when you think about growing your business?
Sure. Well, what kept me up last night was entirely different from what normally keeps me up. What kept me up last night was figuring out a cake for my son's birthday. I have to give a shout out to my 8-year-old Lucas. He turned 8 today.
There you go. Congratulations, Lucas.
But normally what keeps me up in thinking about business growth is, and I think it is actually having children watching, you know, Mom the Entrepreneur, making sure that work has meaning and has lasting impact in the organizations I serve. You know, I don't want it to be about coming in and you know, offering a solution to a problem and then just leaving it. It really has to be, how can we make this sustainable? And because it is so human-centric, how are we impacting the lives of those around us? And so for me, the meaning comes from, and the deep purpose in this work comes from knowing that I'm affecting people. And so making sure that I do that with grace and taking the responsibility of ensuring that we're going to deliver something better and that I can help companies get there.
I love that. You know, sustainability is so important. And so many times when we think about external strategies, I'm using the broad we. I never do this, by the way, but we tend to forget about the internal audiences, and making sure that you said silos earlier on, making sure that everyone in the organization understands that strategy and delivers on that brand promise. Right.
And I mean, understanding the consequences of, if we're going to make a change here, how does it affect the teams behind the scenes that are going to make this happen? And I use Disney a lot in the work that I do in kind of using that example of the fact that at Disney, you've got this on-stage experience, and so everyone's, you know, an actor and serving the customer, but behind the scenes, what's actually happening? And so are you burdening employees? And so when you do any kind of journey mapping and figuring out what are those moments that have, you know, great impact in a positive way on a customer, well, what's happening behind the scenes with the team and the tools and the processes so that this happens so seamlessly?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the duck on the water, right? There's a lot of Feet are moving really fast, but it looks very calm on the outside.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully as those feet move, you're not burning out.
Yeah,
so
there you
how
go.
do you make sure you don't burn out the duck?
Okay. The second question that I like to ask is, what is the best piece of business advice you've ever received? And if it's different than what you give, then tell me what you give.
Yeah, and I'm glad I had a little time to think about this, so thanks for sharing those questions in advance. I would say that the best advice actually comes from Steve Jobs, and it was to start with the customer and work backwards rather than letting technology be the starting point. And coming from a technologist and a personal hero of mine, those words really meant a lot in terms of how I thought about it. And I spent 20 years in technology as well. So starting from when I was, ironically, when I was young, I used to go with my father, and he sold personal computers at a brick and mortar store, and I would join him and sell with him. And so I was this 12-year-old selling the IBM PS2 to families who would come in, and recognizing that, the family didn't want to be sold on how to use DOS prompts and Lotus and WordPerfect, but that they needed to see that there was this connection between my father and I, and that, even a 12-year-old girl can use this thing, so why can't we too? And so the stories that came out of that and the connection, it definitely permeated through the work that I've continued to do in terms of making sure that it's not the technology first, it's the customer.
Sure.
It's different from the advice that I give, which actually has to do with my own personal journey into entrepreneurship. I had always worked for larger companies, and so when I decided about 4 years ago to kind of go off on my own and create this new path for myself, I think a lot of things held me back, and I had all these reasons, and unfortunately I think a lot of women do this, where we say, oh, well, I need this certification, and I need this background, and I need to have all these things, and we let that hold us back in terms of our own value of our worth. And so the first thing I say is, hey, write all those things down, use some sticky notes, and write down every single thing that's you're afraid of or that might be holding you back, and then put it into basically two columns. One is complete BS. This is something that's holding us back, but it shouldn't be. That it's not, it's what's in our head, but it's not the reality. And then there might be some things we actually do need to work on. And so create a plan for how am I going to do that? What's my timeline? And then let's go out and just go for it. So being able to just go for it and focus on achieving those dreams that we have is so important to me, and the advice I like to share.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I'm sure that's great advice for the listeners. When we talk about customer experience, because really that's what we're trying to do, right? The change, as opposed to customer service. We're really looking at driving that experience. In an article I was reading, it said that, customer experience realignment for a company really involves dramatic changes in 3 areas: culture, operations, and technology.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
So I think, yes, I definitely agree with that. I think that the fourth is around leadership, and knowing that if your leadership isn't on board with this and understand that the alignment that they have has to drive a lot of that cultural change in the communication, that comes first. So I would definitely add that. I think that's about the strategy that you have as a company, the governance you put in place, the accountability of everyone. And so that fourth pillar has to be there. And around culture, it is about the stories you have. It's about how you communicate with people, how you celebrate when you've done this well. From an operations perspective, it's about breaking down the journey and every touch point you have with the customer. From a technology perspective, it's very much the same thing about how do you enable an omni-channel experience, because customers do expect more. Customer expectations are constantly evolving. And so how do you connect with them in their best mode of communication, their best way of connecting? So they all definitely are important. But yeah, I would say add leadership to that puzzle.
Okay. Is there a greater emphasis on one than the other?
Well, I mean, it's a people business, first and foremost. And I think the work that we do, like I said, is very human-centric. So thinking about how are you shifting your culture and beliefs as an organization around a customer-first strategy? How do you really think about who is this customer? How do you listen to them? How do you listen with empathy too? So whether that be bringing in customers to talk to you about the experience they're having, or doing ethnographic research and going home. I love the example of Intuit. One thing Intuit does, which I think is amazing, is that every employee has to do a follow me home. They literally go into the home of 2 customers each year. Every employee does this to find out how do they use their software. And so they research it, and I think we all have to be researchers of our products and services, and wear that hat and really understand them, because that certainly gives every employee much more empathy. So they get thousands and thousands of interviews every year about what their customers think of them, which really helps them evolve.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I worked for a while in the action sports industry, a little while, about 13 years. And some of the things we used to do as well is actually go and visit, I'll pick on skateboarders and go see what was in their closet, right?
Sure.
What kind of clothes did they have versus what they wore in the street when they were skating versus what they had. So I'm a big believer, again, this immersiveness into the consumer to really understand the needs, motivations, because ultimately that's what really drives everything else. The talk about, you mentioned journey a couple times. So I'm gonna segue right over to journey mapping and personas.
Yeah.
So I wrote down here, chicken or the egg? What comes first?
So persona for me comes first. And for those listeners who aren't quite familiar with these terms, in the customer experience world, this is the bread and butter of us understanding the customer and doing what's called customer design. A persona is a fictional characterization of a customer, really an ideal customer. And you'll have 3 to 5 of these in any business. I like starting with that persona because then you're really getting in the head of, in the heart and mind of really who is this person and what's their day like and what tools do they use, what brands do they like, what are their goals, what are their pain points. Once you do that, then you build a journey around that person. And so I love starting with the person first, and then the journey is what are the actions that they're doing as they interact with your company. What are the thoughts that they have as they do so. So you're really getting in. I'd say that's really empathetic in terms of what are they saying, what are they saying in their head, and then what are they feeling as well. So the journey map really ties to who is this person, how do they interact with us as a brand, what moments are meaningful. And when we see in the journey map that, we just really frustrated a customer, we put them on hold for this long, how do we do that? When I work with teams and we map out their experience, and sometimes they kind of recognize, oh wow, we just put our customer through something that we wouldn't want. We wouldn't want our mom to have to deal with. So why are we doing this?
Sure.
So
now you mentioned
important.
a fictional characterization of the client, but it's not. We're not sitting here and with an empty pad and just kind of writing notes because we feel like that's what our ideal customer is, right? We're
Right.
basing that off of some market research or previous interactions, and we're trying to build that foundation of I used to look at qualitative and quantitative. I used to say, my quantitative is the skeleton, really the nuts and bolts, and then we're going to do the qual. We're going to actually start to put the character to this individual.
Well, it's so important to move away from just demographics. And so the data that you have as a company, you've hopefully been collecting tons of data. Hopefully. And so that's telling you one thing. It's telling you, okay, maybe your target customer is a woman who's 25 to 35. Okay, that's great. But that doesn't really get me empathetic about her.
Sure.
So, what age is she exactly? What is her name? Does she have a dog? What does she do in a day? What kind of coffee does she drink? I want to know much, much more about her, because then I can connect with her. And so that's why that's so important, is to go beyond just the generalized data. And yes, you're going to come up with some hypothesis about who that is, but in reality, you may have just made up someone who doesn't exist, or that might not really be your customer. And so it's so important to go out and actually talk to that person and find out, did the persona we just create actually match real customers, or did we create someone who's basically a lookalike of us?
Sure.
Or is maybe a little too close to a real person? And so we've got to be cautious about all those things.
And these are not, and you mentioned typical company will have 3 or 4 or 5. And that's what I always say, because you have to, depends on if you're somebody, I'll pick on a B2B world, right? You've got someone who's going to start the project, evaluate the project, write the checks for the project, right? So those all become
more
different.
in B2B. Just B2B is a little more complex, I would say, because you do have relationships at different levels within an organization, and you have to think about who the stakeholders are, who's the sponsor, who you work with day to day. They may be very, very different.
Okay.
Different goals.
Where do companies, in your experience, typically fail when it comes to implementing these? Do they just give up because it's extra work, or they don't really invest the time, or it's a one and done and they think, well, I did it, I don't have to do it again?
Yes.
Yes.
I've seen all of that.
All those. Okay.
Unfortunately, I've seen all of it. But I would say most commonly, I think companies start with that intention, but they treat it as a project and not as a long-term transformation of their organization. So they miss the leadership and the culture aspect of it. So, I'll ask, have you done journey mapping? And it's like, well, yeah, but they're covered in dust over on that shelf over there. And it's, for me, it's how do you make it just part of everyday.
Sure.
And so whether you can journey map wallpaper around your organization and get people constantly attached to this, creating champions in the organization. And so having a customer advisory board that's constantly, going out and helping people do that research. But it has to be cross-functional because you can kill it in a silo if you're not careful, or creating a separate silo. It's got to go kind of cross-functional and have the buy-in from the top.
And I think the key thing I heard is a champion. Next week, actually, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be doing a show on competitive intelligence, establishing a competitive intelligence program.
Yep.
And that's one of my suggestions, or highly my recommendations,
Sure.
is you have to have someone who's going to champion it every day, because it's not a project. Right. It is a strategy that you're implementing into your business.
Exactly.
Same thing with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not a project. It's a strategy that you're really implementing, just like any other strategy.
Right. And it's not simply enough to just have a head of customer experience, some person you appoint into this role and have them sit in their own corner office. It's really about how do you build an organization around this idea. So, and I think that having a chief customer officer is wonderful if they're given the ability to really do this outside of, doing it within a silo or a project, but doing it across the organization.
Okay. Do you find that companies are actually putting people in place in that role, or it's like, well, you're the marketing guy, you're now also the head of experience, or you're HR, and it's
I'm
kind of
always
an add-on.
curious where they come from when someone gets promoted into this new role, and it's become kind of a hot trend to see, now we're having these VPs of customer experience or chief customer officer, and sometimes they come from operations or marketing, but often it's a team of one. And it's, well, where's the budget coming from? And,
Sure.
and who are you stealing this from? Because it is so new. I think this is evolving in the customer experience practice as a whole. But I do think that person needs more support, often needs a lot of data at their
Sure.
fingertips. So how can they work? And that's so important. The responsibilities that person is taking on are really kind of chief collaborator.
Okay. And so, again, for the audience, this is an investment. It's not, really shouldn't look at it as an expense, but an investment in the company's future. And it needs a
Right.
budget, needs its own budget.
Right,
not,
and
to
the
your
business
point.
case behind it is all about growth.
Right.
I mean, fundamentally, you're going to create new relationships with customers you don't have, and you're going to retain the ones that that you're losing, and that's so essential. And the way we measure it has to be tied to what KPIs are we putting in here, so that we know we've got a better lifetime value within our customer, that we're retaining them over time. It's exciting, when we can see that kind of impact and measure it.
Sure. You've mentioned this a couple times, so I'm going to go to it because it's one of my questions. Measurement. How does an organization, I mean, we always struggle, they say, marketing's not measurable, but there's ways to measure it. It might not be a specific dollar or whatever it happens to be, but
Right.
So how does someone measure the impact of this program, a customer experience program?
Right. Well, there's so many measures, and I think you can quickly boil the ocean if you're not careful. So you have to kind of first recognize, what are you trying to solve? Do you want to deepen the relationship you have with existing customers? Do you need to attract new customers? What are you really looking to do with the program? And so what are the meaningful aspects of the customer design that we're going to work on? So perhaps it's retaining customers you have, deepening that relationship. Okay, so how are we shifting culturally? What kind of training are we putting in place? We'll measure it starting from, what is our current attrition rate? What do our customers think about us? So when we do voice of the customer work and we research and survey and get feedback, what's the net promoter score? I mean, there's plenty of metrics out there. What's the customer effort score? Are they expecting to have to put in as much effort to work with us as we've made them go through?
Sure.
And then when we impact the journey, when we shift something in that customer journey, then let's measure the outcome. Did we make that customer's experience better? And how did that turn into true loyalty?
Okay. All right. So lots of different measurements. It's just thinking about them up front and putting them in place,
Right.
as opposed to after the effect.
Yeah. You've got to start somewhere. You've got to benchmark it,
Sure.
but really benchmark around what's the problem you're trying to solve, rather than just throwing out,
A bunch of
different, bunch
All
of
right.
different wasteful metrics.
So tell me a story. All right, we're storytellers.
Sure.
You're gonna tell me a story about one that you've worked with, or just another example that you know of that implemented a customer first strategy and it really had an impact on their business, and kind of how did that look and go?
Yeah, so I may go a little broader on you than what you've asked, but
Okay.
I actually like looking at it from an industry perspective, and I've done a lot of work in the animal health industry.
Okay.
So pets are, for many people, their family.
Yeah, I have two extra boys in my family.
Of course, I've got an extra girl, my only girl, and the animal health industry is booming. And if you think of all the products and services that serve pets out there, there's myriad of them. The veterinarian should be at the heart of that experience because that's a trusted source of information. However, you're only going to the vet. Hopefully your pets are healthy, but most people only go to the vet 1.4 times a year. And so how do you connect to a veterinarian when you're never actually in their office? And so what's really special about kind of the work I've gotten to do in the animal health industry, everything from working with pharmaceutical companies to home delivery to nutrition and retail, it's about thinking about how can you bring the voice of the veterinarian to the forefront, and connecting with consumers in meaningful ways, even though they're not physically there. And so you have to think of an omni-channel experience. And there's so many great technology solutions in there and in that industry that are coming to the forefront now because they're recognizing that this is B2B2C. Right? If you think of the businesses actually trying to connect with the veterinarian, who they're trying to make a salesperson, but guess what? Vets aren't salespeople.
Yeah,
and so, so how do you create something that's meaningful for a veterinarian to be able to offer to their consumers in new and unique ways that get them to be at the forefront of that being the trusted source? So that's been a really fun one to be able to play in, and certainly an evolving industry that's growing rapidly.
Wow, that's fantastic. Do you have a story of one that didn't turn out so well?
I do. I mean, I say that I work with everything from pharmaceuticals to phones to forklifts. So on the phone side, I had opportunity to work with Nokia.
Okay.
And, I think that's an example where Nokia was a little bit late to the game in, evolving from, they love their hardware and, the fact that you could type into a keyboard and they were connected to the users they did have without thinking about longer term, how do we build a user experience? And how do we focus on software? And so they let others come before them and unfortunately didn't realize, they thought their brand had enough relevance to keep them through that storm, to weather the storm, but it didn't. So I think that's a pretty interesting example of a company that neglected their user experience, and it hurt them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's probably a lot of case studies when it comes to neglect of of the
airline
user.
industry is a great one too.
Yeah.
There's plenty.
Yeah, my wife was just recently on a flight, and they were serving meals, and her boss said to her, "Well, didn't you pre-order your meal? You have to pre-order it now." And it's like, I'm sorry, what?
What?
Yeah, it's
Right?
pretty crazy.
Yeah, companies stumble on for the sake of efficiency at not building this in appropriately. So certainly we've, as we think of, and that's the thing. We want to be faster and we want to be more efficient. But what do we sacrifice as a result of that?
Yeah, exactly. And the airline industry, unfortunately, has been sacrificing a lot, in my opinion. I'm going to go on a trip, and I'm concerned about my baggage going to cost me for an extra pound, another $100. Anyway, we are coming to an end.
Sure.
So one last final question. 2 recommendations for the listeners thinking about implementing in this program.
Listen first is one of them, which really means start by trying to understand who is your customer and what's meaningful to them, going out and getting feedback, really asking those questions. And it has to be part of the employee experience as well. So appointing your employees to go do that, I think, is even more meaningful because that makes them even more accountable when they've heard from their customers what they love and what they don't. It makes them eager to try to change that. So allowing them to be champions of it is kind of the second piece of it. But first listen, then react.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell the listeners how they can contact you and learn more about your business?
Thanks, Angelo. Yeah, www.loyaltycraft.com. You can learn all about what we do. We're also on LinkedIn. You can find us at LoyaltyCraft or Lauren Fear. And we're on Instagram and Twitter as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really
you.
interesting conversation, and I'm hoping that the listeners definitely got some value out of it, and I'm sure they did. Thank you again for joining us at the cafe today. You can find out more about me, read my blogs, or view my show videos at theponzigroup.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I think everybody is on LinkedIn, almost everybody. And if your business is in need of a CMO, but you're not ready for a full-time person yet, connect with me. I'd welcome the opportunity to explore the benefits of using a fractional CMO. You can also subscribe to this show at thebusinessgrowthcafe.com or on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Spreaker, and many other platforms coming to you from around the world. Join me next week for lunch at the Business Growth Cafe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion at the Business Growth Cafe with your host, Angelo Ponzi. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website at www.businessgrowthcafe.com. Read Angelo Ponzi's blogs at www.theponzigroup.com.
Hello.
What it would feel like to lose everything: your job, your home, your family, your dignity. This has happened to thousands of the men, women, veterans, and young adults we serve at Working Wardrobes. What do we do to help? We provide career development services, life skills workshops, job skills training. We provide the perfect interview outfit, and we get clients placed in jobs. Call Working Wardrobes, 714-210-2460. Donate, volunteer, invest, hire.
Imagine buying a newspaper and discovering that the news you're reading is 6 months old. There isn't much that stays the same for 6 months, and the same thing goes for background checks. In a time when so much outdated information is being passed around, it's good to know that People G2 offers something different. At People G2, we provide today's intelligence, not yesterday's news. Our value-added approach offers you a fully FCRA-compliant solution that includes up-to-the-minute information. By combining industry-leading technology with old-school human investigation, People G2 is able to give you information that is accurate right now, delivered quickly through our online system, or integrated with your HR system. So ask yourself, are you comfortable working with old news, or are you ready for a different kind of background check company? Visit peopleg2.com or call 800-630-2880. That's 800-630-2880 or peopleg2.com.
When you use the Premier Rewards Gold Card from American Express, the rewards points can keep on multiplying. Buy 3 with triple points on airfare. Buy 2 with double points on gas and groceries. And a single point for pretty much every other dollar you spend on the card. Then, start choosing from over 1 million rewards to redeem all those points. Apply today and the annual fee for the first year is on us. Call 1-800-AXP-GOLD or visit axpgold.com. The annual fee for the card is $175. See terms, conditions, and restrictions at axpgold.com.
I'm on the observation deck of the Empire State Building to demonstrate how much material Waste Management recycles. As North America's largest residential recycler, last year alone, Waste Management recycled 12.9 million tons. How much is that? Let's do the math. Carry the 6. It's enough to fill this building more than 27 times. With experience like that, we're bound to have a program that can help your business recycle. Talk to Waste Management or visit thinkgreen.com.
Do you want a free analysis of your inbound marketing? Do you want it in 30 seconds or less? Then check out Marketing Grader, the free marketing tool from HubSpot. It's simple. Just go to marketinggrader.com, enter the URL that you want to analyze, and Marketing Grader will instantly give you a detailed report grading your lead generation, mobile marketing, social media, competitive benchmarking, and more. It's simple, it's powerful, and it's free. marketinggrader.com.
It's time for the Talent Talk Radio Show, brought to you by People G2, a nationwide leader in background checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk Radio Show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for tuning in here to Talent Talk. And it is Tuesday, and I'm really excited about today's show. Not only do I have my new buddy Dov Barron on with us today, I also have Milton Green in live in studio, came up from the San Diego area. So we're going to have a really good show for you here today. And this show is really about talking to people who are talented, who have really unique perspectives on talent and how we can help our people, whether it's our managers manage better or our people be more inspired and engaged. And we've had so many wonderful stories over the last 5 years of doing this show that I threw them all in a book and talked to kind of give the overarching idea of what happened with my company and all the changes that we had to go through to become a great company. And the book's called The Power of Company Culture. So I'd love to have you check that out wherever you get your books, and it's in all the different formats. You can get it have it in your hand, you can have it on your Kindle, or you can have an audio. So I'd love to have you check that out and let us know what you think. Talent Talk is live every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, but most of you actually show up a little late, and that's okay. You come as a podcast, you show up on iTunes, you show up on iHeartRadio, and we love to have your engagement and everyone there downloading shows and sharing. It's been a big part of helping us get the word out and allowing these conversations to get to more people, and that's really what we want to do, is to ensure that people who are struggling, managers and leaders who are struggling with, what's the next idea? What's the next thing I should be thinking about getting this conversation out to them? So please help us do that. And a big thank you to everyone who's doing that and visiting talenttalkradio.com. The last thing we're trying to do to really help get these great ideas and these sort of concepts out is to make sure we keep the conversation going on Twitter. So if you follow us there at PeopleG2, my producer Mike, he adds that little hashtag Talent Talk, but he throws out the best of the best little kind of one-liners as the conversation is going here today. You're welcome to retweet those or make comments and let us know what you think. We've even had some great guest suggestions there, so that's a great place to do that. But let me get to my guests, who I've already started to talk about, but my first guest will be Dov Barron. He's a consultant that works with Fortune 500 companies. He's author of Purpose Missing Piece. And he's also got a great podcast, which I was a guest on. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a moment. And then we'll bring in, after the commercial break, Milton Green. He's the Human Resources Director for Charter Communications. And we'll get to him in just a moment. But, Dov, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, mate. I'm happy and excited to be here with you and to share with the audience and hopefully add a ton of value.
Yeah, and so now it's my turn to interview you. You just recently interviewed me and threw that out over the Memorial Day weekend. We saw that the show was up live, so hopefully people can get a double dose here, I guess, of us. So, but why don't you tell everyone about yourself? Introduce yourself to my audience. Let us know, what's important for our conversation today about the work that you do, and what we should know more about you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Chris. Well, as you said, my name is Dov Barron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership. FullMontyLeadership.com. I speak internationally. I was rated by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers, and a bunch of other really nice accolades that I'm very grateful and honored to receive. The bottom line is that my work is about helping leaders find their purpose and helping companies become purpose-driven organizations, building purpose-driven cultures so that they can actually be of great service in the world.
So why does purpose matter? Let's kind of start there. That's where you've put your stake in the ground, right? Why does that matter?
It's a great question. I think that in truth, the purpose has always mattered, but why it matters so much now is what we know is if you look at millennial talent, and let's face it, in the war on talent, talent won. So they have the upper hand, they have the power, and this is a good thing. I think it's actually a great thing, because one of the things that millennials will say consistently is they want meaningful work. Well, what does that mean? It means they want to be involved with a company who is doing something more than what they're doing. They're a part of something bigger. They want to make a difference, and that is what purpose is.
So, there's a lot of people talking about purpose, and I think sometimes we get a little bit confused about purpose and maybe mission or even passion. So can you talk about how are those things different? How is purpose sort of different from mission or even passion?
Thank you for asking, because there is a significant difference. So, we all wrote our mission statements back in the 90s, and even in the early 2000s, we all were trying to find our passion. And mission is great, and if you go into any large company, you'll see a mission statement plastered on the wall, and you can simply ask the person sitting at the front desk, what is the mission statement of your company? And there's a good chance, even though it's right behind their head, they don't know. Right? The CEO doesn't really know. Maybe the CEO might know, but not many other people. So mission statements are statements that are contrived very often to somehow summarize what we're about. And that's really what they are. They're the what. And then there's the passion. And people look at, this must be my purpose. This is my passion. But what I want to put to you is for each of us to consider this for a moment. I just want you to go back in time and think about what you were passionate about in your 20s, maybe your 30s. Now let me ask you this simple question. Are you still passionate about the same things? There's a pretty good chance that you're not. Now why is that? Because passion is transitory. Passion is the vehicle that transports purpose. Purpose is what travels in it. So as an example, if let's say we're suddenly ruled by some grand authoritarian government who say, speaking is now banned. Oh, you can't speak. Okay, well, I guess I'll do my podcast. No, that's banned. Okay, I guess I'll write. No, that's banned. And they take away every outlet I possibly got that I'm actually passionate about delivering in. And they say, no, you can't do that. You actually have to go work at McDonald's and flip burgers. What am I going to do when I get there? The answer is exactly what I do now. It's not the best outlet for it. It's not the best vehicle for it. But it is my purpose, and my purpose does not go away. It deepens, it evolves, but it does not erode. It does not go away. Passion is transitory. Purpose is not. Mission is mental, it's structured, it's designed, but it's not got the emotional evocation. Purpose emotionally evokes in its people. So that's what we want to do in a company. We want to evoke the emotion of the people around us.
So someone's listening to this, and let's say that they're fist pumping in the air right now, and they're saying, yes, I'm with Dov, I want to do this. One of the hardest things to do then is to start, right? Is to figure that out. Yep. What is really my purpose? So maybe we could talk about how did you come to discover what your purpose was? Maybe that'll help other people, kind of down that line to think about their own.
That's a great question. So, if you'd have asked me on June 19th, 1990, was I living a purposeful life? I would have said yes. On June 20th, 1990, I was free climbing at about 120 feet, because I was an adrenaline junkie, and fell 12 stories on solid rock and got smashed to pieces.
Wow.
And I can tell you the gory details of that. There's no need for me to do that. But what I can tell you was that the recovery was long and it was brutally hard. And in the process of it, I fell into a very deep, dark depression. And in the process of that, realized that I kept telling people I was coming back, but there is no back. That's not how life works. And I had to go forward. And what that meant was I had to find my purpose. And that was the beginning of digging into that work. Now, here's what's interesting about it, is when I tell people the story of the fall, they'll always say, well, that must have changed your life. And the answer is it didn't. You see, we get these diagnoses of, you've had a heart attack, you're in the hospital, your wife leaves you, you're diagnosed with cancer, something terrible happens, and we think that changes people's lives, but it doesn't. What it does is we say it will change our lives, but what it actually does is it embeds us in our ego. It keeps us stuck where we are. We go, okay, I've got to get back to where I was. And what happens is that is what I call a pivotal moment. But where the change takes place is actually in the choice point, which is in the future of that moment. And the future of that moment is when everything can go back to normal and you go, no, it has to change. And it's in that moment that you really look for your purpose. Why am I actually here? If I'm not going back to do what I did before, if I'm not going back to doing it in the way that I did before, then I have to look at, why am I doing this? Now, your purpose is not simply this idea of why. It's a deeply emotional connection you have to making a shift in the world. It's something that you have to serve in the world. And that's where you begin to look. What is it that upsets me? See, we think it's about passion. We think our finding our purpose is about the things that make us joyous. No. Your passion is found in your joy. Your purpose is found in your pain. It's by looking into what Joseph Campbell said. Look into the dark cave, and there you will find the treasure you've been looking for. And that treasure is your purpose.
Well, it's certainly a powerful story, and I think for a lot of people, they want to maybe ignore the emotional component that you described, right? They want to be, as someone might term as being rational, right? They want to come up with write it down on a piece of paper and very rationally choose what their purpose is going to be. And ignore all of the emotional components, right? What might make you excited to get up in the morning, that might make you want to go and do work, or whatever that connection is.
Absolutely.
And so do you find a lot of that where people are sort of ignoring that emotional component?
Well, I think that was, I've been doing this work for over 30 years, and that was certainly something I banged up against all the time. We bang up against it much, much less now. And even when we do, 5 minutes into the meeting, people are like, oh, I get it. I was recently working with a health technology company, and the chief medical officer said, I don't have time for this woo stuff, this California crap. That's what he said. And I was like, okay. And now he is, I think, my greatest advocate for the work that we do. He's constantly at conferences telling everybody about the work we do because he gets it. He gets you see, when you get connected to this, it doesn't just transform your business. It doesn't just transform your culture. It transforms your life. It transforms the way you are with everybody. And this is the thing. You see, part of the lie is if you're my age or around my age, which is blah, 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 if you're around that age, you probably grew up with the idea that your emotions were to be kept separate, that your personal life and your professional life were separate things. And here's the thing we need to know and understand is there is no separation. Unless you are some kind of schizophrenic, that's not a fact. You are the same person. And being emotionally connected to why you get up in the morning, what drives you in your life, is what determines the joy in your life. So don't you want to go to work and be joyous? When we go to work, why do we think it's okay to speak to people in a way that you wouldn't speak to your husband, your wife, your children, your friends? Why would you do that? Because you think it's okay because it's a professional environment? No. Get connected to your emotional self. Now, please understand, understanding your emotions is not the same as being an emotional lunatic. This is not about emotionally vomiting over people.
Right.
This is about being real, telling your truth, and being deeply connected to your purpose. That's vastly different than just being an emotional volcano.
Right. And so you mentioned one of your clients. I'm sort of curious, do you spend more of your time working with individuals, or is it more on a company basis, or a little bit of both?
It's actually both. So in that particular case, that came out of a CEO that I work privately with. I work with a handful of private clients who are usually entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, high-level individuals, high-level entrepreneurs, those kinds of people. And very often they will bring me into their company. So we start off sometimes with the individual and sometimes with the company. So in the case I just talked about, we were working with the company. We were brought in to help this company who was a health technology company, to design and elicit their purpose. And in the process of that, all of the executives were committed to finding their own purpose. And through that, we went on to work with each of the executives privately, although we were working with the company as well.
So what are they typically looking for when they bring you in? Are they looking for that kind of connection with their purpose, or are they just sort of walking in saying, well, things aren't right, we're not sure what to do, help us?
It can be both, to be honest with you. So sometimes it's like, okay, we know we don't have our purpose, and we're kind of getting that's important. We've read the research on millennials. We want to hire top talent. We know we have to have more meaning. But sometimes it's more problem solving in the context of, how come we're losing our top talent? How come we can't keep people? We're spending, and this is true, companies are spending 1.5 to 2 times the annual salary of an individual to hire them. That's a high cost. And if they're not staying with you longer than that, then there's no ROI. So they want to bring us in for that. But what they really want is to have their people unify around what it is that they're doing and how they're doing it. And what this does is it's very powerful in unifying people. It brings them tight, brings them close, and it creates enormous loyalty. So the average millennial changes jobs about every 1.5 to 2 years. Well, when I started in the workforce, I was asked, what do you want to do? That was a 20 to 40-year question. Millennials, it's a 4-year question. A career, not a job, a career is 4 years. So you've got to be able to keep people for an entire career in order to double your ROI on hiring them. So they get that purpose will transform that. So purpose has massive financial implications to the bottom line. And the soft skills are the new hard bottom line.
So are those some of the results that you're able to achieve, is help them maybe deal with a particular issue, or is it maybe getting more focused in on who they are as an organization and as a person, and then letting them take that new power to go and solve their problems themselves?
No, we do it both ways. So we will work with them, as I said, as a company to help find them purpose, with the individuals to find the purpose, and then we start helping them to design a corporate culture around that. So we'll build an entire culture around that by building the maxims, or what other people think of as values. It's actually not. It's deeper than that. But the maxims that support that, and that we build a culture out of that. And yes, it does indeed solve a lot of the problems. But here's the thing, this is not just my work. If we look back, we find that in the research in the S&P 500, that the average company over a 15-year period was doing about 116% profit, 116% growth rather, which is pretty great, pretty good. However, purpose-driven organizations are doing 1,861% growth. That's significantly different. Based on purpose.
That's radically different.
Yeah. Certainly a lot better.
Yeah.
So there's a real hard bottom line to purpose. So when people say, oh, I don't know about bringing you in, we don't know if we want to spend that, I'm like, okay, would you rather have 116 or would you have 1,861% growth? It's your choice.
Right, right. Well, I know you also, with beyond working with companies, you do some keynotes as well, and one of them that kind of caught our eye, because something that I think you and I speak a little, maybe has some crossover here, is the title is How Leaders Can Thrive in the Age of AI. So I'm curious, obviously you're not going to give us the whole presentation here in the next couple minutes, but what are you sort of seeing out there right now as it relates to leadership and this sort of ever-changing bit of technology that's, will AI be as sort of groundbreaking as when we all started carrying a phone around, right, which had everything we needed on it? What are you sort of seeing with leadership and AI?
It's a great question. So AI is, there's no doubt about it that it's coming and we can't avoid it. And it's powerful. And what we know is that about 40% of today's jobs that exist are going to be gone by 2040, and they'll be replaced by AI. That is pretty scary for a lot of people. However, what AI can do is AI can optimize, but AI cannot create. AI cannot create. So if you want to really make yourself indispensable in the age to come, if you want to thrive as a leader, you have to be creative. AI does not have compassion. AI does not have empathy. So the creative, empathetic, compassionate leader will always do well, even in the age of AI. And in fact, will actually educate AI. So that's part of why we are going to thrive in the age of AI as great leaders who are purpose-driven and connected to themselves emotionally. And that means deep levels of self-knowledge. The great leaders of tomorrow will be the ones who are committed to understanding themselves at a much deeper level.
Well, and that's super important. And I think if you take that and along with what you talked about with purpose, certainly someone listening to this may, have some kind of alarm bells going on in their head that they need to be thinking about some new things tonight. Is there anything else, as you're out there as a speaker and a consultant and you're working with people, is there something else that maybe you typically see that other consultants and strategists seem to miss that to you maybe is kind of vitally obvious about being a great leader in today's marketplace?
Yeah, one of the things that I see that so many miss is the need to connect to the emotional pieces, what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. Many consultants are trying to come up with the next strategy to succeed in business, but the next strategy is an internal strategy, not an external strategy. The deeper we go within ourselves, the more powerful we are as leaders and the better we are as leaders. So it is a journey of self-discovery. The great leaders of tomorrow really have a deep level of emotional intelligence, and that is oftentimes what is really missed.
Well, Dov, you seem like you're right on top of it. You have a great perspective on all this, and I'm sure that probably also comes from staying on top of what other leaders are thinking about, other thought leaders in our industry. So I'm wondering if there's a book that maybe you're reading right now or one that you typically suggest people check out.
Well, it may sound conceited, but I would definitely recommend my book, which is called Fiercely Loyal. Fiercely Loyal, How High-Performing Companies Develop and Retain Top Talent. And it's written all around this, finding your purpose and actually being able to keep millennials. You can also find my book called One Red Thread, which helps you to find your purpose. Both of those books will be extraordinarily valuable to you. There are many great books, and I certainly would recommend that you grab as many as you possibly can. But these are going to really help you to get grips of what it is that we're speaking about here today.
Well, final question. How can people get a hold of you if they're interested in finding out more about you as a speaker, as a consultant? Maybe they want to read your blogs. What's the best way for them to find out more about you?
Thank you for asking, Chris. You can find out more about me by going to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or speaker, as you prefer, consulting or speaking. But fullmontyleadership.com, you find out about my blogs. There's over 600 articles in there about my podcast, which is the #1 podcast in the world, which Chris, of course, was recently a guest on. And you can find out about bringing me in any way, shape, or form. There's a ton of resources there for you, and I hope that you will go there and tap into all those resources. It's been a pleasure and an honor being here, Chris. I want to thank you for inviting me to serve your audience.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some really great insights into leadership and really getting us focused today on purpose. I know our listeners will certainly have taken something away that they can use in their careers and even at home. So hopefully we'll have you come back at some point and give us an update on all the cool stuff that you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we'll be right back after this quick commercial break, and I'll bring in my second guest who's in studio, Milton Green.
Imagine buying a newspaper and discovering that the news you're reading is 6 months old. There isn't much that stays the same for 6 months, and the same thing goes for background checks. In a time when so much outdated information is being passed around, it's good to...
When you use the Premier Rewards Gold Card from American Express, the rewards points can